Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christine Cajano, and I'm the Senior Mitigation Strategist for Resilience Action Partners, FEMA's Community Engagement and Risk Communication Provider. I'd like to welcome you today to the National Emergency Management Association's webinar on IMMERSED, a virtual reality experience about flood and resilience. We have a little bit of a welcome this afternoon from Peter Herrick Jr. joining us from FEMA headquarters. Peter?
Thanks, Chrissy. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Herrick Jr., Emergency Management Specialist in the Data and Communications Branch for FEMA's Risk Management Directorate. My work here at FEMA is focused on helping communities and states understand and reduce their risk profiles, while ultimately providing and improving their ability to prepare for threats and disasters. The most cutting-edge way that we're doing this in 2017 is with a virtual reality tool called IMMERSED, which we created to help users understand the real impacts that flooding brings to communities and individuals. The experience is intended to encourage users to consider the direct benefits of mitigation action taken to prevent catastrophic damage from flooding in at-risk areas. This project is especially relevant and timely as we're in the middle of hurricane season and have seen crises like Harvey and Irma strike. Today we'll be sharing information about IMMERSED and more broadly information that will allow you to understand how virtual reality is driving real behavior change. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Chrissy and Julie Yorkshire. Thank you.
All right. So Resilience Action Partners, as I said, is FEMA's community engagement and risk communication provider. We're focused on helping the agency and our state partners and stakeholders on developing strong, innovative community engagement and mitigation planning tools. I'm joined here today with Julie Yorkshire, an account supervisor with Resilience Action Partners. We are both core members of the team that developed the virtual reality experience today. FEMA's mission is to support our citizens and first responders to ensure that as a nation, we work together to build, sustain, and improve our capability to prepare for, protect against, respond to, recover from, and mitigate all hazards. Now, there may be a lot of you that work mostly on that respond to and recover from end of the emergency management spectrum, but we're really focused on that term mitigation. So if you already are familiar with mitigation, please pardon me, but for the sake of getting everyone on the same page, hazard mitigation is defined as any sustained action taken to reduce or eliminate the long-term risk to life and property from hazard events. So the two most important things, you remember two things only about mitigation. Number one, it's that we're really talking about sustained action. And second, that we're talking about long-term risk reduction. We're not talking about the short-term measures that you do during an event. We're talking about long-term elimination of risk. So while FEMA does a lot of different things as an agency, our work in IMMERSED is really focused on the pre-disaster stuff that communities do to make sure that if and when a hazard event occurs, it does not become so catastrophic that we consider it a disaster. We're not talking about sandbags. We're instead talking about getting people permanently out of harm's way. Now, I'm sure that if you are a member of NEMA, you probably have a decent idea of what FEMA does, and you've seen a number of the brochures about the do's and don'ts of preparing for a natural disaster, whether it's make a kit, build a plan, and stay informed, or drop, cover, and hold on, or turn around, don't drown. These are all important, sticky taglines, but they're just a tagline, and a brochure is just a piece of paper, and that piece of paper is probably going to end up in the trash. We hope that people read them, and we hope that people act on them, but we also know that a piece of paper doesn't really have the power to leave you with very strong feelings that stick. And as human beings, we have a hard time acting when the sky is blue and when everything is working out just fine, right? It's actually a part of the way our brains are wired. There tends to be this gap between being aware of our risk and acting on it. In our contracts, we work a lot with rooting our work in behavioral science. And those basics of behavioral science tell us that information alone, that tagline, that publication, doesn't necessarily change how concerned people are about their risk. In fact, humans tend to not make rational choices in line with their best interests. We believe that if a major flood hasn't happened recently, it won't happen again in the future. We judge our future risk based on our past experience and on how things are now. If it's not raining right now, it can never flood. We are really, really convinced that hazards are more likely to strike other people and not us, and that those other people that the hazard may strike are going to be the ones to do something about it. People in general default to doing nothing, and we care about what we want immediately, about what's good for us in the long term. That's why it's much more, this is why people, if given an annuity or a lump sum, they want the lump sum, they want the money immediately. That has implications for risk reduction too. There's a whole slew of federal laws, FEMA programs, and other policies that give communities access to data and tools that help them to reduce their risk and to mitigate. In fact, this data and tools for risk reduction is central to the FEMA flood mapping program called RiskMap, meaning mapping, assessment, and planning. You may have experienced RiskMap if your community has gone through a flood insurance rate map update. RiskMap provides high-quality flood maps and information, tools to better assess risk from flooding, and planning and outreach support to communities to help them take action to mitigate that flood risk. But remember what I said, human beings on the whole stink at being rational, and we don't really react to data. Leading with facts or data can sometimes reinforce our misconceptions and actually cause people to dig in their heels more about their point of view, which makes them even less likely to act on their risk. Behavioral science tells us that data-forward approach can be tricky. And so there's some evidence that says that video is better, seeing is better. But especially after this hurricane season, we've seen countless videos of what flooding looks like. Harvey, Maria, Sandy, Matthew, we've even had unnamed storms in Louisiana and Texas that have given us catastrophic flooding. We know what a devastating flood looks like. And even after seeing all that footage and hearing about all those losses, many communities have still not taken action. So if they aren't going to get it by seeing it in writing in that brochure, and if we get desensitized to seeing it on the news, especially after such a bad hurricane season, people have to feel it. They have to experience it. But the problem is that it's not necessarily safe to be at the center of a flood crisis. And FEMA never wants a community to have to go through that flood to really understand what it's like. Being in a flood event is gut-wrenching. It's dirty and it's wet and it's dangerous. And this is really where virtual reality comes in. Julie?
Virtual reality, or VR as we call it for short, connects people in ways that fact sheets and videos simply cannot, as Chrissy mentioned. And this distinction is really the reason we created a virtual flood crisis. And the ultimate goal of IMMERSED is to increase mitigation implementation in communities nationwide and also challenge people's attitudes, how they actually feel about flood risk. So our target audience is the local non-technical decision maker who may not genuinely believe that they are at risk of flooding, value financial and time investments in mitigation, or have the ability to take action. A few of our secondary audiences for this tool are planners, emergency responders, and of course the general public. We'd like to say that this project is all about inspiring and building champions of resilience. Our VR experience IMMERSED puts you at the center of a 360-degree experience that guides you through a narrative, but the user controls the direction of it, and you're transported to another time and place with sound, visuals, and interactive challenges. IMMERSED utilizes a headset, headphones, and a hand controller to allow you, the user, to fully interact with the experience, to feel and see it for yourself on a very personal level. Virtual reality shuts out the world and transports you to this different place. If you, for example, push a table over in virtual reality inside of a residential home, you, with your controller, move it into in or out of your field of view. So if you go under the water in the experience, the sound will muffle as if you're actually underwater. And as professionals in this field, you are the ones who respond to and clean up from a flood. And what does VR mean to you? It does make members of a community understand the relevance and reality of this kind of natural disaster. Let's talk about flooding for a minute. We know that floods are America's most common and expensive natural disaster. And as flooding happens across the entire country, we're made aware of it in the news. It may be coastal or along rivers or flash or slow. Floods may happen because a dam broke or a levee breached or it just rained a lot. And with FEMA's Risk Map program, communities know where their highest flood risk areas are and can act to protect their communities. But nature doesn't always follow maps, and the risk map process also encourages local officials to find mitigation opportunities across their entire community. The U.S. had more floods in 2016 than any other year on record, showing the value of mitigation is only increasing. In fact, for every $1 spent preparing for a flood right now, you can save your community an average of $4 later on. And that's the best average that we have. There's research out there that indicates that the ratio could be as high as 1 to 16. And that's a huge amount of money that can be saved. We know that there are almost 36,000 municipal governments in the United States, and each one of those has elected officials and community leaders who are responsible for protecting their citizens. You might know one of them. You are emergency management professionals, and the field exists to keep people safe in the event of a disaster. We realize it's human nature to justify our lack of immediate concern when it comes to risk. We all have those feelings, the feeling that it won't happen to us. And it's not just private citizens who think this. Plenty of community leaders think this way too. So what makes virtual reality work so well? Well, when people use VR, they process and internalize the experience in their own way. And studies have shown it to be very effective in overcoming our cognitive biases. We looked at a recent Stanford study, which found that making people chop down trees in VR led them to use 20% fewer paper products later on. And this choice resulted from the increased feeling of responsibility that came with having cut down trees in that VR scenario. If you think about it, VR sits comfortably between entertainment on one end of the spectrum and reality on the other. It feels like a game, but it also feels like it's real. So continuing this same train of thought, there are a variety of experiential marketing tactics being used today to drive behavior change. The first one that I'll talk about is augmented reality, or AR for short, and this consists of overlaying computer-generated images on top of real life. Many of you might have heard of the Pokemon Go app. The Pokemon Go app is an example of AR where users can catch Pokemon in the real world by utilizing Google Maps, which tracks the geo-coordinates of users' locations. And the technology's capabilities are only increasing rapidly, and Apple and Google both released frameworks for development of mobile and tablet applications this year, with results proving very positive. A case for using this technology could be made for FEMA in a couple of ways, like 3D models of communities that can come to life on top of tables using an iPad or an iPhone. Another tactic I'll talk about is 360 video, which is captured using a 360-degree video camera and then shown using a stereoscopic viewing device such as a desktop or mobile virtual reality headset like Google Cardboard. These experiences typically cost less than a fully computer-generated experience, but they are also less flexible, as you cannot easily manipulate the content once it has been captured. And these experiences can be distributed and consumed on consumer mobile devices like iOS or Android using Google Cardboard headsets, which can be purchased for as little as $10. Clouds Over Sidra is a 360-degree video/mini documentary which follows a 12-year-old refugee around a camp and makeshift settlement. It's touted as a prime example of the ultimate empathy machine. In fact, 1 in 6 people pledged humanitarian aid donations after watching this video, which is 2 times the normal. And finally, VR, virtual reality, immerses people into new environments, to the point that I was making before. Perhaps environments that would normally be unsafe or simulate experiences that don't typically happen. VR is being used in everything from training simulations to games. The VR in IMMERSED allows local decision makers to experience flooding as if it were actually happening in the present, so that they have less of a tendency to cognitively distance themselves by pushing flood risk into an unknown future. By physically facing a flood in VR, it actually tricks the brain into interpreting the experience into a first-hand one, which lessens that optimism bias that only good things will happen to us and bad things will never happen to us. Immersed is a first-person experience, so not only are you in a flood, but you have to respond to it in real time. You cannot ignore it, and you, the user, are entirely in charge. For Immersed, the challenge is to move non-technical decision makers from awareness to action by providing this catalyst to make risk more relevant and then inspire them to seek answers about how to mitigate their community's flood risks. We know that local officials may have good intentions, but not necessarily the resources to execute upon them. So with this challenge in front of us, we recognize the steps to get them to act are a couple of things, beginning with recognition, followed by relevance, knowledge, and the ability and intent. The continuum is based off of the health belief model that says there are steps which happen between awareness and action that directly relate to beliefs influencing behavior. So when we built the VR experience, we wanted to have the user hit on each pillar of this continuum, beginning at recognition and arriving at intent to act. When someone leaves the immersed experience, we want them to ultimately feel changed, and not only changed, but capable of mitigating. We provide them with resources afterwards to emphasize the importance while equipping them with the knowledge that they need. But the message of resilience is coming at us hard from a lot of different directions. Many communities will face a risk in coming years. And since it can be a hard thing to imagine, we want to give you a taste of what you'd be up against during a flood crisis. So we're going to show you a video which gives you a look inside Immersed. So as you can see, users are led through a series of flood situations. This is a residential home. Then they have the rare opportunity later to go back in time to see what impact mitigation could have had during the flood crisis. The experience clocks in at about 5 minutes long, and we know that mitigation takes a lot longer than 5 minutes to implement, but it visually shows mitigation decisions that a community might make. And that's a scene in the Emergency Operations Center. And then we have some of the mitigation solutions highlighted here, like house elevation, bioswales, building a wetland or a culvert. In Immersed, when you put on the VR headset, you become part of the action. And FEMA's hope is that the experience will act as your call to action to take mitigation actions and plan and explore solutions that ultimately reduce damages. FEMA is committed to helping you and your communities plan and find these solutions before a disaster in your community strikes. Here are a couple of photos of users from past events. We know that FEMA is sharing we are sharing the VR experience with communities and professionals across the United States. We know that VR isn't the perfect solution in all situations ideally, but it will be used at strategic points in a community's risk identification, mapping, and planning process. You can see all of the equipment that the users are holding and wearing, and then in the bottom left, you can see one of our exhibitor booths set up at a national flood conference earlier this year. We've received a lot of coverage in the past year, which is exciting. Here are some tweets and Instagram posts. We have a feature in PR Week, which shines a nice spotlight on FEMA and how we're bringing flood risk to life. We had a feature in FedTech's July issue, just talking about how we're pioneering this movement of using virtual reality to impact behavior change. So you can find a lot of coverage on the internet, and we're hoping to have more as the experience tours the United States.
So Julie talked a little bit earlier about this idea of having to move communities from awareness to action. Immersed is really about the awareness side of the continuum. It's about that light bulb moment for the user to believe that they're at risk of flooding and understand that there is that value in mitigation, that it's worth the investment. They still need to have the ability piece though. And they need to have good examples of what flood mitigation looks like before that they're willing to act. And we talked a little bit about optimism bias before. Another one that we face all the time is likability. Communities need to kind of see that another place that looks like them or has a similar urban form or a similar population, that they've done it too. It's this like, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And so to do that and to address that ability piece to move communities towards action, we partnered with the Economist Intelligence Unit to fill in that last gap in the continuum and show communities that action can be possible. And since today is really all about new tools and new technologies, we wanted to show this to you too. It's called flood economics. Flood economics was created to help us change the conversation about flood mitigation. The Economist Intelligence Unit is the research and analysis division of the Economist Group. If this all sounds familiar, yes, it is a sister company to The Economist magazine. The EIU brings a credible, prominent third-party voice to the flood mitigation discussion. After all, as practitioners and as people who work with FEMA, we've espoused this for a really long time. We've been talking about how mitigation is worth it, but sometimes it takes that third-party voice to say, yeah, it's not just them, it actually is beneficial. So flood economics combines in-depth community case studies with analysis of all flood-related hazard mitigation assistance data from FEMA for those flood projects to develop economic analyses and key takeaways. So overall, flood economics is designed to increase that decision makers' awareness of flood risk and its relevance to their communities, build that knowledge and ability of how to mitigate a community's flood risk, and encourage people to share the knowledge with key industry experts and effective stakeholders. The idea here is to spur a conversation and create a ripple effect. And hopefully in the end, this groundswell of information will spur flood mitigation action. Now, I can't take you through the website live, but I do want to walk you through what the tool looks like. I encourage you to explore it on your own. It's online at www.floodeconomics.com. And there are three main components of the tool, as you can see at those top white boxes. We'll walk through those now. The first part of the website are 5 flood mitigation takeaways that are gleaned from the research. Some of them are probably going to be no-brainers to you guys. Some of them are a little bit more interesting. So the first one of those key takeaways is that flood mitigation benefits go beyond dollars and cents. The research from the EIU found that not only are we talking about avoided property losses and avoided business interruption, we're also talking about things like economic competitiveness for a community, more public safety, improved spaces, and as a catalyst for revitalization of neighborhoods. Research shows the second takeaway is that communities benefit from flood mitigation. It's not just the environment, it's the communities themselves. There are solutions that exist to support funding challenges. FEMA is not the only game in town when it comes to funding mitigation. And in fact, there's a wide range of types of solutions. Some are very costly, some of them are not, but that spectrum of solutions is there. Fourth, communities that mitigate may benefit from flood insurance premium discounts of up to 45% through the community rating system. And finally, and one of the that I actually gravitate towards a lot, is that the benefits of flood mitigation result from local action. Really important here. The benefits of mitigation are from you as a local community taking action, and we show that and highlight it in our 11 community case studies. This second section, the in-depth community case studies, we tried to go for a cross-section of the country. So the case studies are both urban and rural, they're coastal and riverine, and they include both large and small communities. You can filter to look at the case studies by community size, by type of risk, et cetera. Again, to get to that likability factor, where are the communities that look like me? What is a community that's a similar size to me done? The case studies are really about telling the story of what flood mitigation has meant for the communities, including those economic benefits, the calculated return on investment, and benefit cost ratios of the flood mitigation projects that are in the case studies. So as you can see, this one was from one of the case studies in Iowa, and the estimated return on investment was almost 450%, which is pretty significant. And when we say community case study, we're not talking about a couple of pages about these communities. These are really in-depth, couple hundred pages, case studies. Now, the website really does use the highlights and kind of the most compelling and interesting parts of the story. And what's also nice is that the case studies really highlight the challenges of mitigating head on, because it's important for communities that are interested in mitigation to know what they're getting into and to also know that it's worth it in the end. There are also future considerations that highlight how these communities are planning to build on their programs in the future. The final section of flood economics is called The United States Takes Action. So the Economist Intelligence Unit undertook not just these case studies, these deep dives, but they undertook a broad analysis of projects and benefits in the U.S. from 1996 to 2015. They used the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Grant, so pre-disaster mitigation, hazard mitigation grant program, flood mitigation assistance, and then the repetitive and severe repetitive loss projects that existed. So this analysis covers a database of flood mitigation projects of about 21,400 flood-specific projects. They exist in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. The data is summarized by state, so there's a drop-down menu that you see right there where it says California, and you can kind of filter and see what those things look like. The other half of this is that we've kind of sliced and diced the FEMA grant data by type of activity. So say you know that your community is kind of low capacity, you're never going to get to an elevation project. But what did planning and education look like? What did environmental projects look like? And how did we protect critical infrastructure? So we're really excited about the possibility of flood economics to support those ongoing risk reduction efforts and to kind of be that showcase that says, you know what? Communities do this and they find worth and value in it all of the time. So some of our ideas to kind of use flood economics and leverage it moving ahead is to offer that this data demonstrates the direct benefits of specific mitigation actions. This could come from the case studies and from state level information. It's a possibility to leverage ideas for talking with elected officials when updating a hazard mitigation plan, either at the local or at the state level. This can come from both the case studies and the state level data. Often our elected officials are not the ones that write those plans, but they do need to have buy-in because they're the ones that eventually are going to need to help to implement it. The third is we hope that this can help communities that are in the community rating system program demonstrate activities that could potentially translate into CRS credits. We had a number of the case studies talk about that. And finally, we hope that this can help develop ideas to support brainstorming and identify next steps when you're kind of towards the end of the risk map process and moving from having gone through the mapping process to actually implementing and regulating to that map and building resilience. We wanted to cover the IMMERSED tool and also flood economics today, but we wanted to leave you with some resources and additional information. What it really boils down to is when you're mitigating, we got a couple of things we need you to do. First is map. Check FEMA's risk mapping, assessment, and planning program online to get information on how the mapping process works, what data and tools come with the risk map process, and how that can help you mitigate. Second is to plan. Communities that wish to be eligible for certain kinds of non-emergency disaster assistance through the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program need to have a hazard mitigation plan in place. FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Planning website at fema.gov/hazard mitigation planning provides tools, resources, and training opportunities to help increase your ability to plan. And then finally, the whole purpose of this is to move to action. First, check out floodeconomics.com. We encourage you to click around, read a case study, play with your state's data, see if there's anything interesting, new, or revelatory in there. Ask us questions about it. And then secondly, use FEMA's building science publications, particularly about flood and wind, to understand what it means to retrofit buildings and to plan for mitigation action throughout the life cycle of your community's planning zoning decisions. Next. So thank you very much for taking the time to learn more about what we've been working on with FEMA. In case you couldn't tell, we're pretty excited about it. There are not many federal agencies outside of the defense community that are using VR to spur behavior change, and we are really excited about it. If you'd like to learn more about FEMA's mitigation resources or about the IMMERSE project, you can visit fema.gov/immerse and fema.gov/mitigation. This is a tool that was developed for and funded by FEMA's Risk Map program. So those connections to tools and providing tools and moving communities towards action are really central to the design and the development of this tool. I think in its first iteration, we were really focused on the non-technical decision maker, but IMMERSED is one step in a series of technological innovations that can help us with that movement from awareness to action. So as I said, we've reached the end of the presentation, but we do have time to answer questions. Again, use the questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen, and I will be kind of moderating the Q&A as it comes in. We'll start with a question from Steve Ferryman from Ohio. The question is the VR experience available to request at a statewide floodplain management or a county EMA director's conference? Julie, I'm going to toss that one over to you, please.
Sure. So thank you for the question. It's a good one. If you are interested in bringing IMMERSED to any of your events, I would encourage you to reach out to your local FEMA office in your region. If you specifically want like a contact, we can provide that as well. Just email immersed@ogilvy.com. That's immersed at ogilvy.com, and we can follow up with you.
But to your point, a statewide floodplain management conference or county EMA directors, those are the folks that we want to see the experience to be able to better equip them to amplify the message. We have another question about the developers that did this project. So IMMERSED was very, very, very much a team effort. The tool is built on an HTC Vive, and it's actually built on a video game engine. So when we talk about it striking that fine line between behavior change and entertainment, it was actually very much built in an entertainment space. The partners involved were obviously FEMA headquarters providing oversight and direction and kind of where we wanted to go. And then the development team, the behavior change and communication support comes from Ogilvy Public Relations. The technical subject matter expertise comes from Michael Baker International. And then our software developer is a firm called Brightline Interactive that specializes in experiential marketing. Next question is this type of data going to be transitioned into an app? I think that's one for you, Julie.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that we're discussing at the moment as we plan for the year ahead. We would like to scale this because at the moment it's really just a proprietary experience that you can only have if it's at a national or a local event that has had a request for IMMERSED approved. So we've been touring it at the APA conference, the ASFPM conference, state level conferences for floodplain managers, but we would like to see it scaled in an app. We've considered AR, but I think probably something along the lines of Google Cardboard is the direction that we want to pursue. It's really TBD at the moment, but we have heard the feedback. A lot of people want to experience it, so stay tuned, and I check in on the FEMA.gov/immersed website for updates.
Great, thank you, Julie. It looks like we do have some more interest about requesting a tour or having a visit, so we'll kind of take down the names of those folks. As we said, yes, the email is immersed, IMMERSED, at Ogilvy, OGILVY.com. And we'll help you coordinate with your respective FEMA regions. We do have another question about looking towards the future. Will this platform be transitioned to be used for fire threats or emergencies? At this point, because the tool is really connected to the risk map program, we want to first explore other kinds of flood situations. This, I think when you go through the experience, it very much looks like a riverine flood. It does not look like coastal. It does not look like a levee breach or a dam breach. So at this point, we're looking primarily at flooding. But I think there is interest in these kinds of experiential opportunities being transitioned and used in other kinds of events. I don't know, Peter or Julie, if you also want to chime in on that one.
I can't speak for Peter, but what I can say is that we have received interest, but at the moment we're focusing more on flood mitigation and using virtual reality for that purpose alone at the moment.
Okay. I'm seeing lots of requests for additional information. We'll give folks a couple more minutes to submit their questions. One of the things that we felt was really important when we did this is you go through the experience. If you have that aha moment, we didn't want folks to just walk away. So we've put together accompanying kind of collateral materials that directly connect what those little, if you remember in the video, there were kind of bubbles above where we were visualizing the mitigation. So like there was a bubble over the bioswale. There was one over a home elevation. Actually getting those pieces of information and putting them in a little bit of like what goes in your hand, what's the call to action after the fact. So we wanted to make sure that there was that direct connection between what you saw in the experience and what you kind of had and could understand to do after the fact. But we also know that we look at a pretty small slice of how flooding can be mitigated in the experience itself, and that there's a little bit of a wider opportunity to talk about mitigation. And that's why we wanted to present to you guys today, both Immersed and Flood Economics. To us, these two tools together are really important for helping to change that conversation holistically.
Yeah, and something that we haven't mentioned is that year to date, we have had about 1,000 people test out Immersed, and the feedback has just been overwhelmingly positive. We want to get this in front of more people, not just the community leaders, but people that deal with flood insurance and the general public, anybody who can own their risk and then is interested in taking action. We would like to make this accessible to them, whether that's an app in the next year or it's attending a local meeting where Immersed will be.
I feel like our questions are slowing down a bit. Any thought of putting this on floodsmart.gov? Peter, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so as we start to look at what this program looks like going forward, not only do we look at all hazards and do we look at other ways to get out in the community like Julia's talked about, floodsmart.gov, for those of you who are unaware, is going through an update and actually redirects back to the FEMA.gov page for the moment. When that gets back up and running, we're going to look at a lot of different ways that we can roll it out because, you know, right now, obviously the kits are very bulky and we're trying to figure out the easiest way to get them out there. Maybe putting it online is one of the answers. And so that's going to be one of the conversations we're having as we look at what floodsmart.gov can host, but also is that the right venue? Does it meet the requirements, or should we be looking at something similar to accomplish the same goals? So full disclosure, it's a conversation we're going to start having. We're actually going to start having that conversation on Friday. So stay tuned, I guess is the best answer, to be determined at the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm about to go out. I'm about to head out on the road with IMMERSED tomorrow, and the three kits kind of come up to about my waist, and we'll be transporting them via SUV. But you know, we have them in shipping containers. We ship them. Excuse me. We have 3 kits and we ship them across the country to the teams that need it. And we've been very lucky that we have a really good technical support team that provides us really good instructions. I tend to be the kind of a clumsy person, but I can set up and run the experience by myself. So once you get it, it's actually fairly intuitive to put it together. And we're really proud of the product that we have. But we also, like I said, recognize that there's a limited number of people you can kind of get through the headset at any one time. And so for us, looking to feature things like floodsmart.gov and things like having it to be a little bit of a more mobile application are things that we're certainly exploring. Well, it looks like our questions have slowed down. So Karen, I don't know if you want to do any kind of ending, but other than, you know, we do want to thank you for joining us today for the NEMA webinar series, and thank you to Peter for helping to answer questions from FEMA's perspective, and for Julie for really helping us walk through that behavior change piece and for sharing your experience and expertise.
Thanks so much, Chrissy, Julie, and Peter. Appreciate it.